I'm Mayra Ceja, and you're listening to Venture Unplugged. From deep tech crypto to direct-to-consumer brands and products, each week we dive in deep into the lives and challenges of today's most successful founders and investors. New episodes launch every Tuesday. Sign up for our newsletter at ventureunplugged.com and subscribe on iTunes or Spotify. Follow me on Twitter at Mayra Ceja007. I'm really excited about today's episode with Nick Greenfield, the founder of Candid, a direct-to-consumer company for teeth aligners. In this episode, we discuss his early days at Lyft, where those pink famous mustaches come from, why he decided to launch Candid, where the future of retail is going, and more importantly, we get real about fundraising and he provides advice for new founders. This episode is brought to you by Qtum. Qtum is the first proof-of-stake smart contracts blockchain. It has been around for over 2 years and has over 4,000 nodes around the globe. If you're tired of paying high fees on other smart contract platforms, head over to qtum.org. That's QTUM.org and start building your own low-fee Solidity smart contract today. This podcast is co-presented by Blockworks Group and Republic. Blockworks Group is a blockchain events and media production company. For exclusive content and events that provide insight into the crypto and blockchain space, visit them at blockworksgroup.io. Republic is an investment platform that helps companies raise capital from retail investors. For more information, please visit republic.co. For those of you that know me, know that I love to smile. I'm sure most of you have heard that smiling can boost your mood and help you appear more confident and approachable, and even make you happier. But did you know that the researchers at the University of Missouri, Kansas City have found that smiling can help you look younger and thinner? Smiling can also help to predict how long-lasting and satisfying a person's marriage will be, and even predict your lifespan. A smile can add 7 years to your life. But smiling can't be easy if you have crooked teeth. Now this is a story about teeth wars. With Smile Direct Club's most recent IPO, aren't you curious to see if there can be a second unicorn in this category? Nick Greenfield founded Candid alongside several co-founders, including Spencer Solovaara and Lila Cosgrove. Forbes magazine nicknamed the company the Warby Parker of braces. It is a direct-to-consumer company that provides teeth aligners, and it has set out to take a bite out of a multi-billion-dollar market. Nick and his co-founders took the company from 0 to 400 employees in a little over 2 years and have raised over $70 million from VCs like Greycroft, Bessemer, and eVentures. Prior to launching Candid, Nick was an early employee at Zimride, where he worked directly with John Zimmer. Zimride would later become Lyft. He received a BA in International Relations from Stanford University. Now, enjoy the show. And if today's episode brings a smile to your face, make sure to check out the website for more facts on this episode. And remember to subscribe, rate, and share on iTunes. It takes less than 60 seconds, and it will bring a smile to my face. Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm dying to hear about the Candid story, but can we take a minute and go back to 10 years ago, right? When you helped to launch Lyft?
Sure. So we had a hackathon either in January or February of 2012. And at the time, our business was entirely focused on long distance trips. So the idea was if you were going from San Francisco to LA or LA to Vegas or to Burning Man or to someplace like a music festival, which is actually a huge percentage of our business, you could book a ride in somebody else's car. So the idea that we were really thinking about was how do you take cars off the road and make things more efficient? And John and Logan used to tell this story about how transportation had evolved. So they would start with horse and buggy, and then into canals, and then into railroads, eventually into highway systems. But the stat that we love to talk about was that 80% of cars on the road were single occupancy, which means that you just have a lot of people who are driving around by themselves. And so if there would be a way to figure out how to get people to share the ride, we wanted to make that happen. So the slogan of the company was "Life is better when you share the ride." And in January, February of 2012, we started thinking about a shorter trips platform because we had thought from a marketplace standpoint that for marketplace liquidity, longer trips would be better because they'd be more expensive. People would want to spend more time thinking about, how do you plan that trip, and they'd be more willing to buy seats. So think kind of an Airbnb-like platform. And we'd actually started working on a redesign and a whole pivot to look a lot more like Airbnb. But we also said, hey, what if there was this other idea where you could put fewer drivers on the road in cities by having basically replacement for taxis, eventually replacement for public transportation. That would help take cars off the road, let people share their rides. Eventually, you could build a much bigger network around that. And so we started working on the business. The original idea was it was a female driver, female passenger only service.
Interesting.
Yeah, the original pink hue that you saw from the car stashes. Those car stashes were things that we used to give away at conferences for the enterprise business.
Oh, wow.
And so we said, okay, let's do these pink car stashes. And my job at Zimride was I was in charge of the driver side liquidity. And it was really, really hard to find female drivers. And so within about like 6 weeks of coming up with the idea, Harrison, who was the original intern who did the logo, John, one of the founders, and then a couple of the early engineers decided to actually think about opening the business up to everybody. And so right before Memorial Day in June of 2012, we ended up launching Lyft. And I will leave the longer parts of that story out because I think they've been told all over the place. But it was a really, really interesting kind of process. And we, long story short, we found that it was growing like 25% week over week, and we were offering a lower cost, better quality service to people. And it started with one engineer, Sebastian, one designer, Frank, our intern, Harrison, and then a couple people pinch hitting from the Zimride team, and now it's a public company. So
wow,
it was a pretty cool ride to be a part of.
Tell us about sort of the early days of Candid and why did you launch it? I heard you had exceptional teeth growing up, and then it was only kind of a later story where you found this need.
My teeth were good growing up. Exactly. Yeah. And then
they look good now.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I was the first Candid customer, so I can talk about that. But one of the really interesting parts of growing up, and I grew up in a suburban area, lots of my friends had braces. My sister had a really bad orthodontic experience. So when she was, I think, 12 to probably 14, she had braces. She was so miserable. She was in so much pain. And my parents looked at my teeth and said, they're fine. You probably don't need this. Mm-hmm. And so I never even thought about it as something that I would have done. And then I graduated college and I had my first cavity. But then once I got into the working world, I started noticing that my teeth had shifted. And whether this was something I just didn't notice until I got older or something that was happening, I'm unsure of. But I look back at pictures and my teeth look pretty straight. And this is a very typical thing that happens. As you get older, your hormones change, your body changes, and my teeth started to overlap. And so over the years, I was getting more and more overlap of my bottom teeth, which was making it harder to floss. It was increasing my likelihood of cavities. I was getting more plaque. Every time I would go to the dentist, I would spend more and more time with the hygienist. And so one of these visits, I asked my dentist about how much clear aligners would cost, because I had no interest in doing traditional wire bracket braces. And she said $6,000, and I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, this is way, way too expensive. And when you talk about all the other bells and whistles in terms of appointment fees and retainer fees at the end, and the clear aligners themselves, and the 25 appointments you need to do to go back and forth, I looked at that and said, this is not something that I can do. And even though at the time I had dental insurance, which would cover something like $1,000 to $2,000 of that, it still was just far out of my price range, being a new college grad, and also not caring that much about it, right? Like I cared about it, but didn't care enough to put down what would end up being probably close to $10,000. So at this point, I kind of forgot about it. I was like, all right, let me just kind of park this, and maybe when I'm older, I'll do something about it. And then in beginning of 2017, I met the chairman of Candid, and his dad is actually an orthodontist. His grandfather was an orthodontist, and he kind of knew about what was happening in the space. And there was a really interesting intersection of 3 different factors. The first was core IP expiration. So there's an incredibly innovative company in the Bay Area called Align Technologies. They're the maker of the Invisalign. In 1999, they patented using computers to actually move teeth. So no one else was allowed to use a computer program to predict how teeth would move, which means that all other clear aligners outside of Invisalign could only be done using basically hand movement. So yeah, you need to basically stage out each stage by hand, and you couldn't use a computer to make that happen. And enter October 2017, those patents, as well as some other core patents that were important for clear aligners, were rolling off, which meant what I've seen historically in healthcare especially is that when the patents roll off, you start getting generics. And so we expected there to be a real opportunity for a business like Candid to do that. The second thing that I saw was more of the consumerization of healthcare. So, I know you're going to be talking to Ben from Hubble. It's another example of that, where figuring out what are ways that we can take cost out of the healthcare system by going direct to consumer. And so the trends that were happening in that, if you look at Warby and Harry's, and you look at Hubble and a whole host of other companies, we saw that as a real opportunity. And then the third trend that we saw was the ability to, by offering a lower cost product, to access a completely different market. And so in the case of Candid, the original hypothesis we had was by lowering the price and going direct to consumer through a combination of both e-commerce and then basically demand fulfillment centers through our Candid studios, which we'll talk a little bit later. We knew that there would be an opportunity to dramatically increase the size of the market. And so by increasing accessibility and affordability, you combine that and you can build a really big business. And that's what we've seen so far, is that those trends are similar, very, very comparable to the original Lyft story, which is by reducing the price of a ride, for example, in San Francisco from North Beach to Soma, from $20 in a taxi to $8 in a Lyft, we were able to totally change the way that people got around that city. And I think the same things apply to healthcare as well. And so that's really where the original idea came from. And then, if we think about how do you actually make that happen in practice, there are a lot of steps to actually get the business off the ground. But I think it's those three core ideas that really fueled it.
So that caused you to take the plunge. Did you take it by yourself? Did you have a co-founder? Talk to us a little bit, sort of what was your founding team and your founding budget?
Totally. So Candid was really a team effort to get going, more than any company I've seen in the past, except for a company coming out of another company. Candid, originally, there were maybe 8 to 10 people who were working on the business from day one. So the three original folks working on the business were Brett, who's the chairman of Candid, Zach Frankel, who's been involved in the beginnings of a lot of other startups, and then my co-founder, Spencer. And when we were all talking about this idea, we were talking kind of what could this look like, what would it be? And we realized we needed a co-founder who would be on the dental side. So we went out and we found an amazing orthodontist who was one of the top orthodontists in Texas. He'd opened multiple residencies at different dental schools around the country. So he'd been a professor, he'd been a clinician, he'd been in private practice. So we went out and found a co-founding chief dental officer. We knew that product would be really important. So we found our co-founder to be our head of product. We knew that design and packaging and customer experience would be really important. So we went out and found our co-founder as chief design officer. We knew that the financials and the engineering components of things were really important. So went out and found a co-founder who could think about and focus on that. And we knew that legal would be really important. So anything in healthcare and that touches healthcare has so much complexity on the legal side that we knew that kind of from day one, we needed really strong legal help. So we had, I would say 8 to 10 people really working almost full time on the business from the get-go. And what that's given us is a broad base of knowledge of understanding what this can look like, but also kind of an artificial existence of the company. Nobody was taking salaries at the time. My previous company had been acquired by Capital One. So I was in a position where I could work on kind of nights and weekends and start figuring things out. And after about 3 months, I quit my job. A number of other people quit their jobs full time. And then we started thinking about, all right, how are we going to make sure we can pay ourselves? And so we went out and raised a little bit of money at that point. We raised about $2 million in a seed round. Okay. But we actually were fortunate enough to have those relationships, whether it be from Lyft or Paribus, my previous company, or kind of just generally throughout the kind of startup community of people who were interested specifically in this story in this space. And we were able to raise that kind of $2 million initially as soon as we all went all in on the idea and able to kind of propel things forward from there.
In terms of your customer base, is it mainly millennials who we would expect to be making online purchases?
Our hypothesis going in was that our customer would be 22 to 30-year-old female. And it turns out that still for a $2,000 purchase or a $1,900 purchase, it's still expensive. You still have to have money, right? It's still something like a big investment. And so we've seen that our customer base is older, which is surprising. I mean, we have a customer who's in his 80s, and we have customers who go as low as 16, although we will be launching a teen and youth product at some point in the next few months. But really the sweet spot of customers is kind of that 25 to 55-year-old. So that lower age demographic is really interested in Candid. It's something they want to do. But we'll see a few years from now, those people who, as they start kind of having higher salaries, as their jobs start improving, as they start kind of getting more integrated in the workforce, they'll be able to afford the product. And then you also have a segment of the population, which is, looking at the low cost options and saying this is really a stretch for me, but by providing consumer financing, we're able to increase that market sizing. But that's people who are thinking about Candid as their first and predominant form of orthodontics.
How has the doctor adoption worked for you? Are they excited? Do they just see this as additional revenue or complementary to their business?
Our initial experience with the doctor network was that it was a challenge, because we probably at this point have talked to about a fifth of all orthodontists in the country to try to pitch them on why they should be a part of Candid. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that has really evolved. The story we're telling is better patient outcomes, better diagnostics than our competitors, more flexibility and freedom for the doctor to really make their own fully owned clinical decisions about whether a patient should be treated or not and how they should be treated. All of these things were promises, and they were promises that were not necessarily believed at the onset by the doctors. Now we start, over time, we've started seeing more and more doctors come to us and say, hey, this is something I actually want to be a part of, right? And there's a reason for it. It's they can make more money, right? They're retired and they want to do something from home. And effectively, we're making orthodontists radiologists. And so this is something where they can be a part of something much larger. And one of the other interesting things that we've done is for a number of, our orthodontists, we've opened up the opportunity to invest. And so lots of our orthodontists, as they've gone on with Candid, have said, oh, I want to be a part of this kind of broader, in a broader way. I don't want to just do cases. I actually want to own part of the company. And so we've opened that up to a number of our doctors to be able to actually invest in the company directly.
Did you get any pushback from your VCs in that round?
I think the VCs completely understood that
value proposition.
The value of, not just the value, but also the importance of having the doctors really excited. And if you make a sizable investment in a company, you're much more willing to actually go forth and use that company. And I think the basis of what Republic is doing is many ways in there. You have a new kind of group of advocates. And so you can think about Candid not just as this company that I contract with, but actually a company that I'm an investor in and a part of.
That's incredible. And so let's switch gears a little bit. So another major trend that we're seeing in direct-to-consumer companies is combining brick and mortar stores, right? We heard for a long time that retail was dead, and now we're seeing really great value derived from opening up pop-up shops in different cities. I hear you're opening up stores. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process there?
Candid is opening stores. We've opened a bunch of them actually. So we have 25 locations open today. We opened our first one a little more than a year ago. So it's been a sprint to get those open. I think what we've seen, and we talk to and are friendly with everyone from Warby and Bonobos to the Allbirds, all of these different companies that have figured out let's sell online and then go offline. Is there's a really important touch and feel component to having a retail presence. And there's also a really important credibility standpoint, right? The consumer, I would never order an impression kit online and then do it, take photos, send it back and say okay, that's good. I, as a consumer, am not that trustworthy. I don't trust myself actually enough to take good impressions. It turns out that people are really good at taking their own impressions. They're actually just as good as in the doctor's office, but they still don't trust themselves. And so one of the really cool things about the Candid studio is you come in and you get an intraoral scan, and in 15 minutes we take these amazing 3D scans that take 3,000 photos per second and stitch basically your whole mouth together. And you can see what it looks like and then what your teeth will look like moving forward. So I think there's both a clinical value to that and also the in-person kind of touch point value, right? We're not going to send you a pair of aligners that you can just kind of play around with. But if you come in person, you can feel aligners. So all of these things help to add to the credibility of being part of that experience. And then being able to talk to someone, at least on our standpoint, a $2,000 purchase, right. That's a big decision, right? It's not quite buying a car, but it's maybe one level below that. And as people are buying fewer cars, it might be the biggest purchasing decision somebody has that year. So we want to make sure that we're able to facilitate that and make it happen. And the way we've thought about retail is both kind of our more brick and mortar feeling kind of, main type locations. And then we also have other locations that are much more pop-up driven, right? So those are, on the 7th floor of a building in Dallas, or, that's on the 3rd floor of a building in Brooklyn, versus, our store in Chelsea, or our store in West Hollywood, or even, our store in Austin, Texas, which is really at like the hub of that Austin retail district. So we're testing out tons of different models.
Now, a quick word from our sponsor.
In addition to being one of the best smart contracts blockchain in the world, with extremely low fees and easy-to-use platform, Qtim's proof-of-stake system lets anyone stake with as little as a fraction of a Qtim. To learn more and start building today, go to qtum.org. A lot of founders really struggle with how much do you focus on meeting the numbers, revenue, right, versus brand building. What are your thoughts there?
That is the question that I'm wrestling with right now. It's a really important question. So look, I think it depends on the market and the market that you're in. And it depends on your ability to raise capital and how much capital you have. We know in our category that brand awareness is incredibly important, that you will hit a ceiling in terms of your ability to acquire customers if people don't know who you are and aren't actually considering you on their own, whether they're Googling, and just looking up clear liners. But it turns out that to have trust, you need trust in the quality of your product. And it turns out you actually need trust also just in people knowing your brand. So we have a competitor who's spending about $100 to $150 million on TV advertising this year. We also have a competitor who is a well-known brand that has 85% brand awareness in the US. Right. So we have two very large competitors with super, super strong brands. Well, that means that for people to choose Candid, yes, they can trust our product on the reviews and read that, we have great doctors. We're very candid in the way that we do things. We will only take patients we should be taking. All of that can be true. Nonetheless, if you've seen 15 TV ads for a competitor, you may be more likely to go to the competitor just because of the both frequency and kind of recency bias that you have in terms of seeing lots of ads and just saying, okay, I'm going to go with that one. So I think brand and people seeing your product enough is really important. The question is, what does that cost? And over what timeline should you think about doing those things? And I think there are schools of thought that say, look, you need to get 1 billion impressions a month because if you get that, at some point it's going to work. I think that's when you're talking about spending $100 million plus a year. So I think for Candid as a business, we're at this really interesting intersection where we're transitioning from being a growth-oriented and growth-focused company, which is really where I think my specialties lie and where I feel most comfortable, into a company that needs to think about some of those branding elements and start thinking about things on quarterly timeframes or semi-annual or annual timeframes. And it's when you're a startup and you don't know if you're going to be here a year later, it's really, really hard to think about that. So I think that's one of the most challenging marketing questions that as a founder, you need to think about. And if you are, not spending very much money and all of your customers are coming from PR, or you're focused on channel B2B sales, it's totally irrelevant. So this is a question that hopefully if you're the founder of a startup, you get to wrestle with. And we're just starting to think about those things now.
And so how do you view competition?
We look at our competition as, probably 2 or 3 different perspectives. The first is they're growing the market. So we are definitely second place in terms of the scale and size that we have in the doctor-directed at-home clear liner market. We are nowhere near the size of our largest competitor. They're spending probably 10 times as much money as we spend on marketing. They're going really, really big in terms of what's happening and probably going public. So we don't have to look at them and say, okay, this is a one-to-one head-to-head battle yet. Now, at some point in the future, it probably will be, but we need to think about taking care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. The second set of competitors that we have, and I think probably the more important competitor, is people just deciding they don't want to do this, right? So there's the inertia of, oh, I'll do it next year, or, oh, this probably isn't for me. And that kind of market demand and latency that's just sitting there, convincing people that Candid is the right solution for them, that's really the most challenging competitive kind of nature out there. And so, I've been in the Lyft Uber war where it was every single ride, it's transactional, you're fighting for every single ride. The way we see our market is there are going to be 3 to 4 million customers a year who every year they're choosing one of these brands, and we will figure out how to fight for and win incrementally those customers. For now, we need to generate enough demand and awareness in the category associated with the product that we're offering and the value proposition for why people should even step off the sidelines into the game and start thinking about playing with this. So I think that the way we look at competition is, look, our largest competitors are so much larger than we are that if we spend all our time focusing what they're doing and trying to copy what they're doing and try to, play in their space, we're going to just end up always being last. And if we think about how can we do things that are different, how can we do things that are better, what are the areas for real improvement that can take this to the next level, driving better patient outcomes, having like better clinical processes, the things that healthcare companies will do, we will find ourselves a really, really large piece of that market, hopefully the largest piece of that market, but we don't want to spend too much time thinking about the other side.
So let's shift gears a little bit to the other hot topic that a lot of founders are plagued with is fundraising. So you went from the initial 2 million to now 78.4 million. How are you prepared for that psychological effect of having 78 million in your bank account? What has shifted? Can anything prepare you for that?
Well, 78 million is not in the account all at once. I wish that we were burning no capital. So look, I think as the business continues to grow, your needs change and how we're thinking about what we need shifts. And look, raising a lot of capital is, I would equate it to a pie eating contest where the prize is more pie. Every time you raise capital, you're selling some piece of your business. So it's not just like, oh, great, like we raised this huge round, like it's a congratulations moment. No, it's like you just sold more of your business and the stakes have changed, right? So now the stakes are, we're thinking, okay, well now, if our investors want a 2 or 3x return, the company has to be worth Y to be able to return that money to them, which means that we really have to have a huge outcome, which means we need to drive even more and better results across the board in every part of our business. So I think raising money actually really ups the stakes. It's celebrated in the press. It's celebrated, on TechCrunch. Half the articles are about companies that have raised money. In the press likes to talk about these huge, unicorn valuations and rounds. And I think it can be dangerous because the prize is what you're going for is not to raise money. The prize you're going for is to drive value for your customers and ultimately have a business that can be, a 100-year business and long-term build something sustainable. In our case, having raised how much we've raised, we view the stakes as really high. The pressure is really high. There's a lot we have to get done, and we have a shorter period to do that because as part of raising capital, we're burning capital more aggressively to hit that growth. And so it just changes the timelines.
And what is your advice for founders then looking to raise? Is it early stages, just raise as little as possible or raise when you can?
I think understanding how you want to use capital is the most important question to ask before you decide how much to raise, whether or not you should raise, et cetera. And general rule of thumb is, build some type of like back of the envelope model that tells you what you're going to do, and then cut the amount of time that you have in half and double the amount of money that you need. It's very, very challenging to accurately predict all of the crazy stuff that will happen to you. We've had so many third-party variables that have changed and totally, even in the last 6 months, like blown up our business for a month at a time, right? And that all of a sudden your burn changes and the trajectory changes. There are things that you do where you thought you needed to raise money, and it turns out that actually you needed to focus much more heavily as a founder on going and closing 2 more contracts because you could actually pay for your business. And if you think about, can my business ever be a business that does more than $5 or $10 million in revenue? If the answer is no, then you really need to think about, well, why am I raising money, right? Because raising money is you now have to pay back investors, and it doesn't matter, if you're raising equity capital and you're raising from venture, you have to pay your investors back. And you probably have to give them some type of multiple, and almost all of them have their own investors, and those investors need their money back within, somewhere between a 5 and 10 year period. And you're very likely not getting a fund in year 1. You're getting a fund in year 3 or year 4, which means that you may have, 3 to 5, maybe 7 years if you're lucky to generate for a venture fund a pretty large return. So you just need to be really cognizant of what your end goal is when raising capital. Now, we've raised a lot of capital, which means we're going for it, right? We're going for, hopefully build a business that can IPO, right? Or build a business that can generate enough cash that it's a really good business to keep private. But that's because we're in an industry where there's $100 billion opportunity, and there are very few businesses that have that. And that's fine, right? Like if you build a really good business that can do $3 million a year in free cash flow, like you are in a really good position, but you should think before taking investment dollars, or think about alternative ways of doing that such that you're better positioned in the future to potentially work with your investors or buy your investors out.
So a hot topic is culture. When did you start thinking about culture? You're at 400 now, or has this kind of been evolutionary, or was it something clear at the forefront?
We had clear values going into the business and culturally knew what we wanted to build. And I feel very fortunate from a cultural standpoint. Like objectively and numerically, we have a very strong and positive culture at Candid. We poll we basically poll the employees every 3 months using Culture Amp, getting like very sophisticated reporting on how people feel about their work experience, how they feel about their career prospects, whether or not they think they're going to be a candidate in the future. And we really try to dive deep on it. And then there are clear things that come out of that survey. And usually there's 2 or 3 things that will be the running themes. And then we actually have very proactive corrective actioning against those, right? So for example, this past quarter, as the company has grown from 40 to 400 people, things like benefits become more challenging, right? Mm-hmm. Because people have expectations. Oh, I'm working at this company that's raised a lot more money. It looks like this, but I have benefits that feel like a startup that's 10 people. So how do we think about correcting those types of issues? So we try to listen, we ask questions, we try to drive the right results, we try to coach. We have a number of our senior managers who work with leadership coaches to continue to improve what they're doing. We do offsites as a leadership team to talk specifically about culture and how we're going to drive that value. Because at the end of the day, if we can get 20 to 30% more efficacy from a team that's excited about coming to work, that's excited if they need to come in on Saturday, that's excited if they need to stay late at night because they like working at Candid, we're going to get way more value at the end of the day. And so I think we've seen improvements. I mean, I would say even over the past year, we've seen pretty clear improvements on things like transparency, in like partnering on goal setting, on benefits, on the things that people have talked about outwardly that's important. And that ultimately drives value. And I think the last part is on hiring. Mm-hmm. Hiring is incredibly challenging, especially in New York. You have so many great startups, right? You have the Warbys and the Harrys and the Pelotons, and you have all these companies that are building new offices here, whether it's Google or Facebook or Palantir, Lyft, right? Like all these guys are all coming to New York because they realize how amazing it is. So we have to stand out from a hiring standpoint such that we can acquire, really smart, really driven, diverse, like highly motivated, experienced people. And I think we've done a really great job of doing that, which has really evolved again over the past year of making that happen. But we're only as good as the team that we bring in, and think about how those people can contribute from a cultural standpoint, not fit in with what we have because we're growing so quickly that there is no concept of fit. It's how do we bring people in that can actually help build up the culture.
And let's talk about the future of retail. What are your thoughts about that?
I think retail will have to transform. I think if you look at the economy today, right, in terms of unemployment and in terms of the stock market and in terms of how real estate's being used, I mean, we've got to be, from a cycle standpoint, close to the peak, and you still have a lot of vacancy on the retail side. I think healthcare will continue to be more important on the retail side, although these ground floor retail locations are 3 times more expensive from a per square foot basis, and I still don't know whether healthcare needs to be on the ground floor. And so I think you're going to start seeing pretty big changes in what that looks like. Now, landlords have done a nice job of locking people into longer term leases, even though there's some short term availability and opportunities out there, but they're really few and far between. So I think we're going to see, we're going to continue to see a transition out of like big department stores. You're going to start seeing kind of more fragmentation. You're going to see more healthcare and wellness services going into retail locations, more gym concepts, more businesses that kind of look and feel like Candid. But at the end of the day, I think some of these companies that are thinking about paying higher rents for, prime real estate, whether it's on Main and Main or Main and Third are going to realize that walk-by traffic maybe isn't as important as they thought it was. And so being on the second floor might be more important, or being on the seventh floor because you're paying, 1/3 of what you pay on the ground floor makes just as much sense. So I think we're going to see a pretty big shift in transition. I think it's going to have, they're going to be big swings, and there's going to be a lot of data around kind of the macroeconomic cycle. And so we haven't seen too much of that yet affecting kind of the startup world, but I think that that's going to change probably in the next few years.
Let's get into some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
How much do you sleep?
8 hours a night.
Do you meditate?
No.
Do you consider yourself a success?
No.
Do you believe in luck?
Yes.
What is your favorite book or good read that you've read recently?
I love finance, finance thrillers. So I'm reading a book called $1 Billion Whale right now, and it's really fun. I just love the craziness of why people do the most insane financial crimes and think they're going to get away with it.
What are founders you admire?
Okay, I'm gonna give you 3. The first is Travis Kalanick. The guy was just totally ruthless, and fighting against him, he would just do whatever he needed to do to win. They did things against Lyft that were borderline, I'm gonna say illegal, but kind of at the edge of what was acceptable. I probably wouldn't have done them myself. In fact, I definitely wouldn't have done them myself, but the fact that he would do that and go kind of above and beyond those extremes is something I admire, just because he was so driven. I would say another one I admire is actually a friend of mine, Angus Pacala, who is at this company called Ouster. It's a company in the LiDAR space. He is just so focused on building the craziest engineering tools and traits to even make what they're doing possible. Crazy semiconductor and chip work, and it's so intellectually out of my league, that just watching it happen and watching the team that he's built and the people who are around him to actually make this happen and how motivated people are. I feel like people would pay to work there because the science challenges they're working on are so incredible. So I would say Angus 2. And I would say 3, probably Bill Gates. Honestly, he's built one of the most successful, if not the most successful companies in the world. He keeps trying to give away his money. The Gates Foundation, from a founding standpoint, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is probably one of the most incredible and important organizations in the world. He still can't give away all of his money because Microsoft stock keeps going up. But over the next 100 years, that's an organization that I can see making profound change in the world. And so he went from being a manically obsessed, money focused founder to saying how can I actually use all of that money to completely change the way the world works, and how can I actually build a company that's really a company. It just happens to be a nonprofit that can make those things happen. So I would say those 3.
And what is one belief that you have that most people would disagree with you on?
I'm a big believer in contingency. I feel like my whole life and everything that's happened has been totally contingent upon just me being in the right place at the right time. I got my job at Zimride because I went to an entrepreneurship career fair because I happened to be taking a computer science class across the street from where that career fair was. I met my girlfriend because I went to a Halloween party. I wasn't necessarily going to go to that Halloween party, but we happened to meet there. So I think that life is very much a series of random events. And I feel like most people struggle to get around the idea that their fate is very much not predestined.
What's your best life hack?
I will at times turn my phone off for a week plus. So if I go on vacation, we'll look at no technology at all. And I come back feeling so refreshed. And then I'm able to hit the ground running at work.
Thanks so much for listening to that episode. New episodes go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find me on Twitter at Mayra Ceja 007. And I'll see you next time.